My parents chose to leave me with my grandparents to focus on my siblings' needs. Years later, I arranged a meaningful dinner to celebrate a milestone, but they prioritized my brother's birthday gift instead. I want to make it abundantly clear that I've never been the favored child in my family. This isn't an overstatement or a fabricated tale. It's a real and defining part of my life. From childhood, my parents openly showed that my younger brother's well-being mattered more to them than mine. For context, my mother became pregnant with my brother just a year after my birth. Though unplanned, my parents were initially thrilled about growing their family. That joy turned to fear when doctors conducted tests and warned that the baby might face severe health challenges. These weren't minor concerns. They were significant enough that my parents considered ending the pregnancy. After much deliberation, they decided to proceed, fully aware of the difficulties ahead. When my brother Liam was born, their worst fears came true. He had critical heart issues requiring immediate medical intervention. My parents were heartbroken and overwhelmed. Liam needed multiple surgeries to survive and spent long periods in the hospital. His condition became the central focus of our family, reshaping everything, including how I was treated. My parents were consumed by anxiety, devotion, and guilt over Liam's health. While I understood they were navigating a challenging situation, it also meant I was largely overlooked. With their attention fixed on Liam's medical needs, I was sent to live with my grandparents during his hospital stays. They visited me only sporadically. Even as a young child, I tried not to resent them. I knew Liam's health was the priority, and I believed my parents were doing their best. Besides, I cherished my time with my grandparents. They were warm and caring. My grandmother made me breakfast every morning, and we spent hours doing simple activities like baking bread or tending to her flowers. My grandfather took me to the playground and shared bedtime stories. They filled the void left by my parents' absence, acting almost like surrogate parents. As Liam's health stabilized and he was able to come home, I expected my parents to bring me back, to reunite our family. But that didn't happen. My mother, still overwhelmed by Liam's recovery and the demands of caring for a chronically ill child, felt unprepared to manage 2 children. She told my grandparents they'd need to keep looking after me for a while longer. My father, busy with work and covering Liam's medical costs, offered little support. My grandparents, who loved having me around, didn't object when my parents extended my stay. They were happy to continue raising me. Though I was disappointed to learn I wouldn't return home, I wasn't crushed. I was in a place where I felt cherished, which gave me comfort. The real pain came when years passed, and my parents showed no intention of bringing me back. What was meant to be a temporary setup became permanent. I only saw them every other weekend, and even that wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes my father was too busy, or they simply didn't make the effort. My grandparents became my primary caregivers, while my parents felt more like distant relatives than family. When I started school, my grandparents handled everything. They drove me to class, picked me up, and were there from morning until bedtime. They ensured I had school supplies, helped with assignments, and cared for me when I was unwell. Meanwhile, my parents never checked in. They didn't ask about my attendance or grades.
If I fait l'île, my grands-parents nursed me back to health.
They took on every responsibility my parents should have fulfilled. During their rare visits, my parents only talked about Liam. They'd update my grandparents on how wonderful Liam was, how courageous he'd been through his surgeries, and how much progress he'd made. I don't recall them ever asking my grandparents about my life or how I was coping. I began to feel completely invisible. I can't recall a single moment when my parents spent time with just me. There was no effort to nurture our bond. Everything revolved around Liam.
Den kam un moment I'll never forget. Liam's birthday party.
My parents threw a lavish celebration for him, thrilled with his recovery. They invited everyone, friends, relatives, neighbors. My grandparents took me along. At the party, I couldn't shake the deep jealousy that surged as I watched Liam beaming, with my parents showering him with affection. The entire event centered on him, and though I knew it was his day, I felt utterly sidelined. I was a child too, yet all the love and attention I yearned for went to my brother. Overwhelmed by those feelings, I broke down in tears in front of everyone. I was mortified, knowing everyone could see me falling apart. My grandparents quickly ushered me to a quiet room to comfort me, but the pain and envy were too intense. Some guests noticed and tried to console me, but nothing truly lifted my spirits. It wasn't about the presents or the party, it was about the love and recognition I desperately craved. Seeing my parents dote on Liam was more than I could bear. After the party, my parents and grandparents had a heated argument. Apparently, my parents were embarrassed by my outburst. They thought it was childish of me to cry publicly, believing I'd drawn unwanted attention to them. My reaction had sparked questions from guests about why I lived with my grandparents, why I wasn't with my parents, and whether they were neglecting me. My parents resented the scrutiny and blamed me for putting them in a position to defend themselves. After that argument, I made a choice. I decided to move back home with my parents. It was something I'd longed for, but when it happened, they barely noticed me, and when they did, it was fleeting. I'd hoped moving back would make them see me, that they'd care for me as they did Liam. But it soon became clear nothing had changed. Liam remained their sole focus, while I lingered on the edges, ignored and forgotten. I was grateful to have my own room, where I spent most of my time outside of school. I didn't want to be isolated, but being around my parents made me feel even more unseen. In my room, at least I didn't have to witness their devotion to Liam while I faded into the background. I'd spend hours there, doing schoolwork or lying in bed, trying to process my emotions. Throughout my school years, my parents showed no interest in my education or achievements. They never inquired about my studies or attended my award ceremonies. Even when I joined school plays or clubs, they didn't show up or acknowledge my efforts. Nothing I did seemed to matter to them. Despite their indifference, I pushed myself to excel academically. My grandparents' occasional attempts to nudge my parents into recognizing my accomplishments were met with silence or dismissal. They'd urge my parents to celebrate my successes, but they either ignored them or brushed it off as unimportant. It hurt deeply to see how little they valued me, especially compared to how they treated Liam. Liam struggled in school. He brought home poor grades and often got into trouble. Teachers sometimes called to discuss his behavior. Yet my parents never seemed fazed. They didn't hold him accountable or reprimand him. If he managed a decent grade or achieved something small, they'd celebrate it like a major triumph, ordering takeout or treating us to dinner at his favorite spot. When I graduated high school and got accepted into college with a partial scholarship, I worried about covering the remaining costs. I asked my parents if they'd saved anything for my education. Deep down, I suspected the answer, but I had to ask. As I feared, they told me all their savings were for Liam. They explained he was the youngest and would need support later. My father bluntly said that as the eldest, I should learn to fend for myself. He offered to help me apply for a student loan, which I'd have to repay after finding a job. It was crushing to hear my parents dismiss me again. While most parents eagerly support their kids' futures, mine made it clear I was on my own. Thankfully, my grandparents had planned ahead. They'd quietly set up a trust fund for me years earlier. When they revealed this and assured me college was covered, I was stunned. I couldn't believe someone cared enough to secure my future. I wept with gratitude, feeling truly valued for the first time. It was overwhelming. Nobody had ever gone to such lengths for me. My grandparents not only believed in me but ensured I could pursue my dreams without financial burdens. But when my parents learned about the trust fund, they weren't happy for me. Instead, they shifted the focus to Liam. Their first question to my grandparents was whether they'd set up a fund for Liam too. My grandfather calmly explained they'd chosen to support me because my parents had always prioritized Liam. They'd seen me neglected for years and wanted to give me a fair chance. Unsurprisingly, my parents didn't take this well. They called it unfair and argued bitterly with my grandparents, insisting both grandchildren deserved equal treatment. They accused my grandparents of favoritism and demanded Liam get a share. They seemed oblivious to how they'd favored Liam his entire life. Despite the accusations, my grandparents stood firm. They refused to yield or let my parents twist the narrative. They stressed this wasn't about favoritism but about balancing the scales, giving me the opportunities my parents had given Liam. Out of love and fairness, they'd made their choice, knowing I'd been overlooked. When my parents couldn't sway my grandparents, they turned to me. They pressured me to share the trust fund, framing it as my duty to support Liam's future. They implied I was selfish for keeping it, though it was a gift from my grandparents. I refused. I told them it wasn't my responsibility to fund Liam's education, especially since they'd always prioritized him financially. My parents were furious, but they had no leverage.
För ons, hjälpt mig grund.
I wouldn't give up what was given to me out of care because they believed Liam deserved everything. It was painful to see they couldn't celebrate my opportunity, but it was also empowering to stand up for myself, even against my parents. After I left for college, my relationship with my parents deteriorated further. They nearly cut off contact, convinced I'd been selfish toward Liam. Liam and I were never close. He was comfortable as the favored child, and with me gone, he didn't have to share our parents' attention. He never reached out during my college years. Though expected, it still hurt. My grandparents remained my rock, checking in, encouraging me, and ensuring I didn't feel abandoned. Then, in my third year of college, tragedy struck. My grandfather passed away suddenly from a heart attack in his sleep. I was devastated. It was the darkest time of my life. I spent days with my grandmother, grieving together. Losing my grandfather, who'd been a true father figure, left an immense void. During this painful period, something unexpected happened. I reconnected with my parents and Liam. My grandfather's death affected us all, and, despite my lingering resentment, the loss brought us closer, if only briefly. It felt like the walls between us had softened. My grandfather had left a letter for my mother, urging her to stop neglecting me and to love both her children equally. He emphasized the importance of family and warned her against continuing to favor one child. Something shifted after that. For the first time, my parents seemed genuinely remorseful. They began reaching out more, asking about my studies, and showing interest in my life. It wasn't perfect, the pain of the past couldn't be erased, but it was a start. I was still hurt by their years of neglect, but their efforts gave me a flicker of hope. I wanted to believe they could change, that they were starting to see their mistakes. When I graduated college, my parents attended the ceremony. They beamed with pride, taking photos with me. It felt strange to have them there after years of ignoring my milestones. Afterward, my parents, Liam, my grandmother, and I went to lunch to celebrate. For once, we felt like a family, even if just for a moment. I wasn't invisible, and that small gesture meant more than I could express. This year, after landing my first well-paying job and earning a substantial salary, I wanted to mark the occasion with something special. I hadn't spent much time with my parents growing up, so I planned a surprise cruise trip for just the three of us. No distractions, just time to make up for lost years. Deep down, I still craved their approval, despite everything. For Liam, I planned to get him a thoughtful gift later to ensure he didn't feel left out. I wanted the cruise to be a surprise, so instead of telling them over the phone, I booked a table at an upscale restaurant to share the news over dinner. When I invited my parents, they sounded eager, even excited to join me. They promised to be on time. But when I arrived at the restaurant, they were nowhere in sight. At first, I gave them the benefit of the doubt, maybe. I called them repeatedly, getting no answer until the sixth try. My father casually said they were wrapping up some errands and would be there soon. Frustrated but hopeful, I stayed at the table, waiting. The waiter kept checking in, asking if my party had arrived, and I grew more embarrassed with each visit. I didn't want to seem like I'd been stood up in a fancy restaurant. Eventually, I ordered food for myself, as I was starving. I ate alone, staring at the empty seats across from me. My calls to my parents went unanswered again. An hour passed, then nearly 2. Finally, after my 15th attempt, my father picked up. He started apologizing, but I was furious. I demanded to know what they'd been doing and why they couldn't have told me they weren't coming. "Calm down," he said dismissively. "We're sorry for the delay. Your mom and I got caught up at the store. We found the perfect birthday gift for Liam, but when we got to the register, your mom realized she'd left her card at home. So we had to drive back to get it. Luckily, the store held the gift, and we just bought it. Liam's going to love it."
By the way, have you gotten anything for your brother yet?
You know his birthday's in 2 weeks, right?
HIS word it me like a punch.
I'd planned this evening to celebrate my success and bond with them, but once again, Liam was their only concern. They'd spent the entire night shopping for his gift, forgetting I was waiting at the restaurant. Not only had they ditched me, but they had the nerve to ask if I'd thought of Liam's birthday. I was enraged but tried to stay composed as I reminded my father they could have shopped for Liam another day. They should have respected my time, especially since I'd gone out of my way to arrange this. My father's response made it worse. He brushed off my feelings, saying they were on their way and we could talk when they arrived. But I was done waiting. I was furious and heartbroken. I paid my bill, left the restaurant, and drove home. My phone buzzed as I drove. My parents were calling and leaving voicemails, saying they'd reached the restaurant but couldn't find me. I ignored them, too hurt to speak. Later that night, my mother sent a string of texts. Instead of apologizing, she attacked me. She called me rude for leaving before they arrived, as if I'd wasted their time. She claimed my petty plans were why they didn't bother with me. I was always so dramatic, she said. Their priorities were perfectly reasonable, and I was wrong to be upset. Her messages reopened old wounds of pain and anger. I'd poured my heart into creating a special moment, only to face the same rejection I'd known all my life. I couldn't handle their harsh words or constant dismissal. I realized that no matter what, Liam would always come first, and I'd remain an afterthought. I blocked her without replying. Update number 1. The reason I planned the cruise was that my parents' behavior had improved significantly after my grandfather's death. I thought they'd finally started seeing me as their child. But I was wrong again. I'm relieved to see the truth now. As of today, I'm done chasing their love or crying for their attention. I've blocked both my parents on my phone. Regarding the update, my parents told Liam about the situation, and he called me this week to discuss it. Liam believes my parents, saying I should have respected them enough to stay at the restaurant instead of leaving. He said they were disappointed in me and had vented to him about my behavior. He invited me to his upcoming birthday party to apologize to them. I declined, asking him to leave me alone for now. He tried to argue, but I told him my issues with our parents were separate from him, and that he'd never understand my pain. Update #2. It's been a month since my last update. For those who asked, I considered canceling the cruise tickets. But then I realized I'd spent a large chunk of my salary on them, so I decided to use them differently. I chose to take my best. We had an incredible time, and I quickly forgot my parents' drama. The trip was a much-needed escape for all of us. But after returning, when I shared my few photos from the cruise on social media, I got messages from my father on Facebook, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful for taking my grandmother without including them. I'd forgotten to block them on Facebook, assuming they rarely used it. My father's nerve to demand inclusion after everything they put me through was shocking. He also mentioned how upset my mother was that I'd blocked her and suggested I go to therapy to fix my immature behavior and stop hurting them. Update number 3. It's been 4 months since my last update, and I'm doing well. I've blocked both my parents and Liam. Honestly, since cutting them off, my life has felt so much lighter. I've learned that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose. Surrounding myself with supportive friends and loved ones has transformed my outlook. My grandmother and I remain close, and I plan to take her on more trips in the future. Thank you for reading. If you haven't followed yet, please do so and stay tuned for more updates on real-life stories happening around you.